Good morning, and welcome again to Black Hat Europe and to our main stage program. This is a new addition to Black Hat this year, so we're very excited to kick it off here today. This is part of our expanded content program in all of the Black Hat events around the world, all aimed at providing you with more content, more actionable insights, and of course, more opportunities to connect with your peers in the global cybersecurity community. Our goal for this program, for the Black Hat main stage, is to hear from some of the thought leaders from within the cybersecurity industry. So CEOs, entrepreneurs, heads of strategy, and really to ask them to provide their perspectives on important topics, trends, and developments. Danny Jenkins is one of those thought leaders and is joining us today to address the important topic of supply chain security, something we've been hearing a lot about in the news since the now infamous SolarWinds attack back in 2020. Danny is a leading cybersecurity expert with over 2 decades of experience building and securing large corporate networks. In 2017, he co-founded zero trust endpoint security company ThreatLocker, and he's made it his mission to educate industry professionals about the latest cybersecurity threats. Please join me in welcoming to the Black Hat main stage, Danny Jenkins, co-founder and CEO of ThreatLocker.
Good afternoon, everybody. So we'll talk a little bit about supply chains and what the real risks are and what the perceived risks are of supply chain. Now, first of all, what do we do now to protect ourselves from the supply chain? Most companies, larger companies, will go through some kind of assessment when they onboard a product. So they'll ask questions like, is it in the cloud? What data is it storing? Is it in the cloud? What data is it storing? Is it payment credit card data? Is it patient information? Is it medical information? Is it confidential? They'll go things like, let's assess the risks. So they'll look at a SIG questionnaire, maybe a SOC 2 report, an ISO report, something like that to see, is the company we're doing business with a secure company? And then from that, they'll either decide this software is worth accepting the risk. And I say accepting because there's always a risk when you onboard a vendor. Is it not worth accepting? So are we going to reject the vendor and not onboard them? Or are we going to transfer the risk to something like insurance? And that's really our 3 options. Now, the big one that comes up quite often is what is more secure, the cloud or on-prem? And I'm quite often confronted with someone saying, no, we can't do cloud for security reasons. And I want to talk about that a little bit because it's not necessarily as true as people think. So if we think about the cloud, the first thing we have to think about is the cloud, the service is now hosted on the internet. And the problem is when we host something on the internet is we're sharing the internet with the whole world. We're sharing it with Russia or North Korea. We're sharing it with China, we're sharing it with Russia, and most terrifying of all, we're sharing it with Liverpool. Now, with that in mind, we think, okay, I'm going to publish a service, I'm going to buy a service, whether it's a CRM, whether it's a healthcare service, and I'm going to have it in the cloud, and that's a potential risk, because somebody could access that from outside. But then start looking at things like maybe Exchange. So if you said, I don't want to do Office 365, I want to use Exchange on-prem, I'm more secure. But let's think about this. When you have an Exchange on-prem server, you're probably opening that port 443 to the internet so your users can access it from their phones. And if you're not opening it through 443, you're requiring a VPN connection, which adds its own set of problems and security weaknesses. And if we think back to 2022, there was a series of Exchange vulnerabilities that allowed attackers to gain access to your Exchange server. And essentially, the way it worked is they would point at your Exchange server, and through a vulnerability, they would exploit the IIS, and they would change your offline address book URL, which seems pretty insignificant. Now, when a user tries to connect to the Exchange server to download their URL, so we saw this in a number of cases in the wild, what it would do is it wouldn't download the malicious payload to their computer, which is what I thought it would have done when I read the vulnerability. It'd actually download the malicious payload to the server. And at this point, it's dormant on the server. And when an admin logged into the server, it put it in the startup folder. So when a domain admin logged in, it would run that script, that malicious payload, and it could potentially do anything it wanted. In one of the cases we saw, it was actually a customer who came into us and said, hey, you guys stopped a major breach on our system. And I said, what happened? And they said, you should stop the batch file from running. Now, when he said that, I genuinely thought it was a false positive. I was like, are you sure that a batch file on your server is a major exploit? So he showed me the batch file. And we actually took it and put it into our lab. And we followed the same exploit that happened. And when the batch file ran, what it did is it reached out to the internet and downloaded a PowerShell file, which then reached out to the internet again and downloaded another PowerShell file, because apparently hackers like to go through lots of steps. This one was base64 encoded for no reason other than to make it more difficult for AVs to read it, which then reached out to the internet, downloaded an executable, and created a group policy to push out ransomware to the entire organization. Now, this comes back to, is the cloud more secure or is on-prem more secure? Because in this case, even if the same vulnerability existed in the cloud, which it didn't, but let's assume it did because it's the same software, the damage to the customer would be that my exchange data was exposed, my email data, which is pretty big damage. But that's a lot less than someone actually got onto my entire Active Directory, pushed out a group policy to my entire organization to deploy ransomware, which then uploaded all of our files to the internet and encrypted all of our files. So it's not as simple as, is cloud more secure or less secure? Because quite often, when you're thinking about the cloud, you're actually taking a risk out of your organization and just exposing that by itself. So if the data isn't that important, it's almost always more secure to put it in the cloud. What about servers that don't have open ports? Because in that case, I said, well, we had an open port, someone connected to 443. What about a program that I ran inside my organization versus outside? So say maybe a system monitoring tool. If I had it in the cloud, someone could log into that tool, they can make changes, maybe an RMM, IT management tool, whereas if it's inside my organization, it has no open ports, nobody can do that. But we saw in 2019, 2020, that wasn't the case. SolarWinds Orion threat actors, nation-state-sponsored threat actors, gained access to SolarWinds source code, to their Git, essentially. They then did a test code injection in October 2019, realized that it wasn't detected, and implemented the Sunburst code in February 2020. This was then packaged by SolarWinds and pushed out to all of their clients as an update. This didn't require any open ports in the environment. It essentially allowed any attacker, or in this case, nation states, backdoor into the business. So when we think about this, we have to acknowledge that there are risks both ways, and just because something is on-prem, it doesn't mean it's more secure. The other thing we need to consider is it's all about the endpoint anyway, because it doesn't matter whether you use the cloud or whether you use on-prem, all of your data has to be accessible in an unencrypted and readable format from the endpoint. Now, does that mean endpoints aren't encrypted? No, they are encrypted, but humans can't read encrypted data. We can have encryption in transit, we can have encryption at rest, but at the end of the day, if I want to open a Word document or a financial file, it has to be readable in unencrypted data. So when we think about where are the biggest risks, we have to think about the endpoint. And going back to 2019, there was a vulnerability in Internet Explorer that allowed any website you visited to run any PowerShell command it wanted to on your computer without any interaction from the user. Now, I know if you were using Internet Explorer in 2019, you probably deserve that. Zoom in 2020, however, was very, very popular, and it had a similar vulnerability where you could launch PowerShell directly from Zoom. And then we saw Felina in 2022. This one scares me a lot, because I know as a security professional that if I get a Word document, I can open that Word document and it's relatively safe. And I can click through the 15 warnings Microsoft gives me, but as long as I don't click enable macros, and I'm safe. Now, users don't know that, but I know that. Now, the Felina vulnerability was slightly different, because every morning when I wake up, I read the news and see what big vulnerabilities are out there. And there's loads of them every single day. There was 21,000 CVEs published in 2022, I believe. Now, most of them are nothing burgers. They're literally just blown out of proportion, over-exaggerated. For example, it might say, you have to right-click on the file, change the properties, do this, be a local admin, and then this can do this. Well, I'm never going to do that. It is a vulnerability, but it's not a likely to be exploited vulnerability. So this Felina vulnerability comes on the news one morning, and it sounds like a nothing burger. So I call our support desk, and I say to them, I live 15 minutes from the office, I say, when I get in the car, hey, I want you to see if this is exploitable. And I speak to a mid-level at best support guy. And by the time I got into the office, he gives me a computer. And it's got on it nothing but ThreatLocker in monitor-only mode, so we've turned off all blocking. It's got antivirus running on it, Windows Defender, and there's a Word document there. docx, not docm, no macro in it. I double-click on this Word document, and Office starts to load, and then it crashes. And within about 10 seconds, PowerShell launches, and then malware is running on this machine. I didn't click Enable Macros. I didn't click Enable Content. This malware gave them complete access to the machine. They could scan the network, they could access file shares, they could do whatever they wanted from the machine. And then in 2023, we saw 3CX had a backdoor in it as well, accidentally pushed out malware to their clients. Now, there's two things about supply chain. There's the biggest, most common risks, and there's the risks that scare people the most. So we have a bunch of investors. We have a board. And the risks that scared the board the most are intentional sabotage. So KnowBe4 accidentally hired a North Korean. They caught it before it was too late. A North Korean spy applied to work at KnowBe4. That scares our board, and it scares me, but it scares the board more than anything else scares the board. Someone getting into our code, someone injecting something malicious, like they did in SolarWinds, like they did with 3CX, and us pushing that code out. And we should be scared of it. But the probability of that affecting your business is actually small. Not impossible, and you should be considering it, but it's small. The other thing is unintentional backdoors. Small probability, but big fear factor. Because the idea of someone intentionally getting into your business like that through a backdoor is something that should keep you up at night. Now, what should keep you up just as much, and probably more, is vulnerabilities. Because I can name 3 or 4 intentional backdoors that were put into software. There were 21,000 CVEs published in 2022, and that's similar to most years. So that's incredibly common, the risk of that software not intentionally being used by the vendor, but having a vulnerability that can be exploited later on, like the Felina vulnerability, like Exchange. And then also weaponization of features. I would say most ransomware we see recently is using PowerShell, 7-zip, WinRAR, built-in tools of the software you run, rather than being an executable itself. And people often overlook that. You don't need to do something malicious on a machine or run something malicious because there's enough programs on the machine that can cause the problems and do damage right out of the box. We don't know, when we make a decision, what is more as globally, is the cloud more secure or is on-prem more secure? The questions you should ask yourself when you choose cloud or on-prem are more about, do I want to let someone into my business, potentially, onto my network, to keep the data safe, or do I want to keep the data outside? And that often depends on the data, the company that's writing the software, what their security is like, what their processes are like. You have to consider this. But the bottom line is, whenever you run software inside your organization, whenever you run any program on your computer, that program has access to everything that you have access to as a user, even if you are not a local admin. So if you go into Process Manager now, Task Manager, and look at all of the running processes, all of those running processes can see everything that you can see, which means that Logitech QuickCam support app in the bottom right corner of your screen that helps you look 10 years younger when you're on a Zoom call, it can see all of your data. It can see your network shares. It can see your financial files. I'm not saying they're stealing it, but if it had a vulnerability or a backdoor, it could see it. Every program you run can see it. So I've already kind of skipped ahead here, but this includes network shares, files, other applications. So Office can see PowerShell. Zoom can see PowerShell. So if PowerShell can cause damage those applications can spawn that. Now, in order for something to be exploited, it either has to have an intentional backdoor or it has to have a vulnerability. And a vulnerability by itself isn't necessarily exploitable. It has to have a way of being exploited. Now, in order for a vulnerability to be exploited, you have to do one of two things. You have to have an open port, so Exchange on the internet is an open port, or it has to ingest data. So pretty much every deployment we do in any kind of organization now, we'll do a report. And I don't think there's a single customer I've seen that we haven't said, you're running vulnerable versions of Log4j. Now, does that mean it's exploitable? Probably not. If someone opens a Word document that's got a malicious code in it, and you have a vulnerable version of Word, that's exploitable. But if you don't open a malicious Word document, it's not exploitable. If you have some wheel alignment software that never ingests data, that's using vulnerable log software, it doesn't mean it's exploitable. These programs that you're running can also make changes to your system. They can see your network, your entire network. They can see everything that's running. They can scan. They can do mmap. They can get information on your network. So what should we be doing to control our environments? First thing is assume a breach. Assume something you're running either has a backdoor or is going to be used against you. Because at some point, it will do. At some point, you're going to have a program that can be used against you. And what you have to say is, I want to limit the amount of damage that can do. Does that mean game over? No, it doesn't mean game over. What it means is, how do we limit the damage? And the first thing we should be doing, and this seems incredibly simple, is block untrusted software. This does two things. One is it stops users running programs that you don't know about. It's bad enough all of the programs you trust could be exploited, could have backdoors in them. But if your users can download any PDF reader they want, if they can download any free software, games, coupon clippers, you're just making that surface area of attack massive. So block all untrusted software. Now, that might sound difficult. This isn't 1995 anymore, or even 2005. Old school whitelisting is like, well, that sounds like a disaster, but it's not. You deploy an agent, it learns the software you use, it matches it with built-in and known applications, and you can see here on the screen, it'll even show you the country it was developed in, and it will show you what it has access to in your organization. So you can say, I'm running 7-zip, this was made in Russia, do I want to continue to run it? I'm not saying you should or shouldn't, I'm not saying 7-zip's good or bad, and we'll show you all of the risks associated with it. It can be used to encrypt files. Does that mean you shouldn't use it? Well, it depends if you have a business case for it. Maybe you want to use it, but you want to limit what it has access to. We can show you, hey, you're running this coupon clipper made in China that has access to every password you enter on any website. Does it mean the coupon clipper is stealing your data? Probably not. The Chinese would never, ever steal data. The other things we should be doing is configuring our system and hardening it. Things like password rotation. It's simple. Make sure you're rotating your passwords regularly, so if someone does get onto one of your machines and they do get data, they can't move around. Enforce encryption internally, and make sure you have geolocation where you can block access to foreign servers. Most attacks now aren't reaching out to Russia to send data back to Russia. They're reaching out to an AWS server in Virginia. But these things don't cost any time. They don't hurt users, so doing things like that is really easy. Turn on things like dual-factor authentication. Someone gains access to your system and they get your password. Dual-factor could be the difference between not being able to see your files, or not being able to log into your Office 365 account, or being able to log in. Take away admin permissions. It doesn't seem like a big thing, and it's not going to stop ransomware running. Ransomware doesn't need to be an admin, but it makes it harder for them to embed deep into the system. You know, there are registry keys you can change in Windows that will boot before any of your security software. You can go into Windows, you can create a registry key, and you can say, run this software before anything else runs, and it will run before your antivirus, your EDR, and everything else. If you're not an admin, you can't change those keys. Dynamic ACLs. Now, this is something that we introduced 2 years ago, and I think it's probably one of the most powerful things we've done. 70% of ransomware attacks recently involve remote encryption. I think you've probably got 500 applications running on your machine. Any of them could be compromised, and now they can potentially connect to servers, encrypt files. 70% according to Microsoft's most recent report. So we looked at this and said, well, how can we stop remote encryption? Well, we can try and detect unusual behavior and disconnect things from the network. That's not really stopping it. It's let's try and determine unusual behavior is difficult. But we can block anyone connecting to our servers remotely. Well, how do users connect to their file servers in that case to access files? So we went and looked at this 3 years ago, and we came up with a solution that allows you to have dynamic ACLs. So think about this. You come into your network tomorrow, you plug in your laptop, and you do an Nmap, and you can see RDP open on your server, you can see file shares open, you can see everything else. User comes in, they can see the same thing. Attacker comes in, they can see the same thing. Now, you could put an 802.11 authentication system to prevent anyone connecting to your network that isn't one of your company-issued devices, which isn't a bad idea. However, users can still see the same ports you, as the IT professionals, can see. And if there's a vulnerability or they brute force your passwords, they can now RDP to your servers. They can now create remote GPOs. So what dynamic ACLs allow you to do is specify ACLs not on IP addresses, but on devices. So when you connect to the network tomorrow morning and you say, I want to RDP to my server because I'm the IT guy and I need to do some management tasks, it will actually connect back to your machine, authenticate your machine before it even responds with an open port. And this is huge, because when we think about someone being on your network trying to encrypt files, they won't be able to see it. The first question by ethical hackers is, can you turn off ThreatLocker because we can't see anything on your network? And that is incredibly powerful. But you can also do it remotely on the internet. So think about that Exchange vulnerability. The way it was exploited was someone connected to port 443. If they couldn't connect, then because it was invisible, they couldn't exploit it. We can track all of your devices, your phones, your laptops, and automatically open the ports as needed. And we just actually launched the same configuration in Office 365. So everyone was trying to deal with token theft. Well, I have dual factor on my Office 365 account. How do I stop users logging in without dual factor? Well, it's easy. You turn on dual factor. But then somebody gets the token. They spoof an email. They ask them to enter the one-time code. They give them the one-time code. They now have a token. They can connect. They can do whatever they want. So what we did is we did the same thing with Office 365, and we said, we're going to track your users' phones, and we're going to track your users' computers, and if any IP address tries to connect to your tenant that isn't one of your trusted devices, or isn't the same IP address as one of your trusted devices, we're going to reject it. So if someone steals your token, they won't be able to see your tenant. ThreatLocker is a full endpoint protection platform. We offer EDR, we offer MDR, but more importantly, the key components we're offering is the ability to actually stop cyber attacks through common sense, whether you call it zero trust, least privilege, or just default deny controls. Stopping untrusted network traffic, stopping untrusted applications, and then controlling exactly what the applications can do. When you deploy ThreatLocker, you're going to see a whole bunch of applications on your system that you do not like, and you are not going to be able to remove them because they're probably going to be important for your business. And what you'll realize is that when we tell you where they were developed, it's going to scare you. But you can then do things like ring fence those applications and say, well, I'm going to allow this application to run, but I'm only going to allow it to see this data and this data and this data. So if it's compromised, it will not be able to step out of its lane. We can't stop supply chain attacks, but what we can do is limit the damage caused by them. We can continue to do auditing, making sure our vendors are secure, but the most important thing you can do is harden your environment so when something is compromised, the damage is limited to that application. And then we back this up with a full EDR that manages all indicators of compromise and then can automatically respond based on custom rules. So you could literally make up a rule that says, if I have someone accesses more than 50 files, then I'm going to block their access to Dropbox, just from Chrome. Or if somebody logs in more than 5 times wrong, I'm going to shut down RDP ports. So you can use all of these components together to really harden your environment. We don't have time for Q&A, unfortunately, but please, I'm going to be down at the ThreatLocker booth. I've got a couple of meetings, but I'll be there. Our team's going to be there. So if you do have any questions, please come by and ask us those questions. If you do like going to conferences, we're actually based in Orlando, Florida. We have a conference in February every year. It's a really great hands-on conference, very, very much about hands on the keyboard. We teach you how to secure your Office 365, how to secure your servers, but also how to hack. We'll teach you how to use Metasploit, how to use rubber duckies, how to use pineapples. That makes you more prepared on how to deal with these attacks. So you can scan here or go to ztw.com for details about that conference. Also, if you want to find out more about how ThreatLocker or how security attacks work in general, we run a series of webinars. You can also see them on YouTube. Anyone here love Macs? Anyone Mac lovers? I don't see many hands, so if there's one at the back. OK, I'd encourage you to do this. Go onto our YouTube channel and search hardening Macs, because I had to make a bet that Macs weren't more secure than Windows. And because we managed to steal some data with a rubber ducky on Windows. With the Mac, there's a video there where we actually managed to extract all data from a Mac and put malware on it and gain access to full control of the Mac just through the Bluetooth connection on their headset. So there's a bunch of cool videos on there as well. So if you like watching that kind of thing, it's worth the time as well. And if you haven't done a demo of ThreatLocker, there's a QR code there. Please schedule a demo, have a look at our product. It takes 45 minutes. You can do a free trial. Most people come to ThreatLocker thinking this is going to be too hard. But I have deployed 70,000 endpoint deployments in an hour a week over 10 weeks. So it's actually not difficult at all, and it's very, very effective at security. But if you have any questions, again, please come to the booth. But I appreciate everyone's time today. Thank you very much.